Good evening, everyone. I was asked to speak to you tonight for 15 minutes about the story behind the scenes of Israel's Hasbara during this war. And then I was told that I'm on camera and that this room is as leaky as the security cabinet meeting. So I'm going to speak for 3. The Jewish people worldwide stand on the brink of a precipice and face a fateful choice that is going to define the course of our history for the next century, at least. On the brink of the war, Israeli society, and I might say the Jewish world in general, were, I'll put it undiplomatically, in a downward death spiral. People were speaking in the horrific language of civil war, wondering whether we are one united nations or whether we have fractured into far more than 12 tribes. We were speaking in the language of whether it's time for a two-state solution, Israel and Judea, and whether the gulf between Jerusalem and Babylon had grown so wide that it could no longer be bridged. President Herzog, a great, great leader who we are very proud and fortunate to have as our president, warned that we are the 3rd Jewish state in history on this soil, and that none has ever passed its 80th birthday. The kingdom of David and Solomon lasted 80 years before it split between Rehoboam and Yerovam. The Hasmonean kingdom lasted only 76 before again it descended into fratricidal civil war. And in 2028, we, the Jewish people, will be the first in the state of Israel to pass that fateful 80th anniversary, and we will break a record that no united Jewish state had done before, and we will do it. The question is only whether we will do it fragmented and divided and polarized, or whether we will do it united, stronger, and able to manage the disagreements between us. But we must never go back to October 6th. But that's one direction that we were on course going in that direction. The other is since October 7th. Because when the October 7th massacre happened, Israeli society did something extraordinary. We abandoned our Jewish wars. We put them to one side, we forgot about politics, we united and remembered that only one thing matters: total victory against Hamas and bringing all the hostages back safe and sound. And I say one thing because they are not two, they are one. And the people who promised that they would never do reserves in the army under this government were in their cockpits by 6:45 in the morning. Dizengoff Square became a central muster point for people to collect donations, and everyone came together under the slogan, Beyachad Nenatzeach. And it wasn't just in Israel, it was around the diaspora as well, where we have witnessed the most extraordinary and inspiring awakening. People who didn't feel strongly about Israel now felt deeply connected, started wearing Magen Davids and lighting Shabbat candles and joining marches for the hostages. And people who were already committed, like all of you in the room, redoubled their efforts because they understood what was at stake. And the diaspora started to fight back because we understood the stakes. Jewish tradition, the Tanakh, tells us that God, he used to have a house here, by the way, just down the street behind me, says, I've placed before you life and death, a blessing and a curse. Therefore choose life so that you and your descendants may live. And we choose life, and that's the message we heard tonight from Michal with this beautiful musical tribute to her hero brother, who everyone in Israel has heard of and watched the reel from Kochav Haba on endless loop on Instagram, reminding us that we have to live, that there is no option to wallow in sorrow or look back in anger at the past. We have to look forward at where we are going. We as Israeli society cannot go back to October 6th. We cannot go back to October 7th. And the reason is not only because the world was perilous enough before this war started, but because the world has become such a more dangerous place for the Jewish world since October 7th, with the crowds that started denying and glorifying and celebrating and encouraging more October 7th atrocities. With governments that lost their nerve and their spine and forgot what they knew to be true on October 7th and are happy to end this war, with Hamas still in power to plot another 10/7, and God forbid the hostages still trapped in Gaza. From UN experts who will be regularly cited as sources of authority, who are active combatants in the information war against Israel. Just yesterday, with the shameful decision by the prosecutor of the ICC to issue arrest warrants against our leaders, we received a reminder of the challenge in front of us. There is a global campaign underfoot to cast the Jewish state as the new Nazi Germany. Because after so many years in which our enemies have been unable, through military, political or economic means to destroy the state of Israel, they have alighted on a new recipe. If you frame Israel as being guilty for genocide, starvation, extermination, you say that the Israelis, the descendants of the victims of the Nazis, are the heirs to the Nazis. And with Nazis, one does not negotiate. Nazis have no redemption. There is no hope. Nazis are to be wiped out. And if we allow this global campaign accusing Israel of genocide and extermination to take root and take hold, it is only a short hop to people saying, well, if the Jews are the new Nazis, perhaps the Nazis should have finished the job, and since they didn't, perhaps we should. That is the challenge facing us now with Hasbara and Israel's public diplomacy, and the fight cannot come only from the government. It must come from the entire Jewish world, because the anti-Zionist campaign is a threat to Jewish safety around the world. It is not possible to say, well, the world will attack Israel and will be safe by the waters of Babylon. If Israel is held guilty of the worst crimes in history, all Jews around the world will be held guilty by association, and there is nothing that even the most radical elements will be able to do to shake off that association. And that is why it is so important that we fight for a world in which facts matter, and in which law matters, and in which basic dignity matters, and in which a well-oiled, vicious campaign that began long before October 7th will not succeed in twisting words and law out of meaning in the ongoing campaign to destroy the Jewish state and persecute the Jewish people worldwide. The Hasbara battlefield is not an even battlefield. Israel can have the best spokespeople in the world and throw the biggest budgets at it, and it will still be an uphill climb. Not only because there are more of them than there are of us. Not only because social media platforms suppress pro-Israel content and amplify things that are already popular. Not only because the pro-Palestinian movement intimidates and scares our own allies out of speaking up for Israel, but because so many of the resources that people rely on, UN officials, human rights organizations, have been weaponized. They are not neutral observers. They are active combatants in the information war against Israel that see themselves as having a role, and that is to stand up for the Palestinians they regard as being dispossessed from their native land by the white settler, colonial, fascist, apartheid, blah, 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 Israelis. And the fight has to come from both Israel and the Jewish world together. Hasbara, public diplomacy, I like to say, is not a service that the welfare state will provide. It has to be a common effort because the other side is not relying on Hamas spokespeople. By the way, Hamas spokespeople always made my life much easier as an Israeli government spokesman. because they were always much better at making the case for why Hamas is irredeemably evil than I ever could, and Hamas bara was the greatest boon to Hasbara ever. Israel has to do a better job at public diplomacy, and the role starts now. There are 3 things that Israel must do to dramatically improve its game. The first is that Israel needs a sayirit, an elite team of government spokespeople, paid, professional, full-time, in every language, in every time zone. We are the only country in the world, the only people in the world, required 24/7 to defend our basic existence and legitimacy. It isn't fair, it isn't right, it isn't just, but it is what it is. It's life, and we have to answer it. Israel needs a fleet of government spokespeople in English, French, Spanish, Arabic, Persian, Russian, Chinese, as far as I'm concerned, in Swedish and Swahili as well, in all time zones. There needs to be someone who can go on TV in Argentina and Brazil when it's the middle of night here in Israel and speak with the authority of the government of Israel, and they need to be trained and centrally briefed and given the ammunition and defensive gear they need to go into battle. The second thing that Israel needs is to treat its public diplomacy operations as a crisis communications war room. To constantly monitor what is happening in the international media, to put out immediate responses, to whack the lies down before they can get out of control, to think proactively, to put out fires. And the government knows how to do it, the army knows how to do it, we have the people who can step up to the plate. It will require hiring spokespeople, and it will require hiring fact-checkers and social media people, but if this is a war that we must win, and win it we must, it is a war that must be fought with the right resources. And the third is, I think, the most important. Israel needs to do a better job of activating the diaspora. It is not only a question of giving the diaspora the tools and resources it needs. The fact sheets, the information, the facts. That's the easy part. The difficult part is to truly make the diaspora feel appreciated and embraced, that Israel respects them and hears them, and that this is their home away from home. And President Herzog gave such an important statement a few weeks ago, saying, we hear you, we listen to you, but it has to be reflected in deeds as well. It has to be reflected in every statement made by every government minister and by every member of Knesset, thinking how their remarks will be understood, not only out of context, but also in context, and how their remarks are making life miserable and difficult for supporters of Israel, as if life were not difficult enough, speaking up for Israel without people giving the enemy ammunition. But it's a fundamental question of making the diaspora feel proud and inspired, and making their eyes glisten, as I know they do when they look at Israel's achievements and look at what we have been able to do through sheer willpower here in Israel. When this war started, I was a private citizen. Within a week, I found myself nationalized as a government spokesman. I had begun by giving interviews in my living room as a former advisor to the president. Soon I received a phone call from Rotem Sella, the publisher, who was setting up a civilian initiative to give support to the government, sort of outsourcing for the Prime Minister's office foreign media relations. Within a day, I was brought on board as an official government spokesman because we needed all hands on deck. That was the level of chaos and emergency in Israel that we needed all the help we could get. And now I'm back to being a private citizen for reasons that have been widely reported, and I have no interest in recounting in front of the cameras. Launching my own initiative to help fight from civil society, one of many initiatives that are taking place. We've launched a new NGO, one that has fundraised, is fundraising, is receiving matching funding from the Diaspora Ministry. We regard this as being a partnership between Israel and the diaspora, civil society and government. This NGO is the framework for my State of a Nation podcast, which, if you're not subscribed to, I give you permission to take your phones out now and subscribe. This week, we are going to be launching a new initiative that I'm very proud of, called the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. You've heard of citizen journalists, ordinary people who grab their phones and document critical events. Well, I'm building a team of citizen spokespersons who grab their microphones and speak up for our country and our people, not in an official capacity, but nevertheless fighting for our country, because we cannot afford to end this war with Hamas in power or the hostages, God forbid, languishing in the Gaza Strip. So we're going to launch from the end of this week every day a briefing on all social media platforms. Think of it as being like a press conference to the diaspora where you can watch and get the main points and sound bites and ammunition that you need to fight against the deluge of lies coming out against Israel, against a world that cannot comprehend the difference between a state that is fighting to prevent another October 7th and a terrorist organization fighting to perpetrate another October 7th. Between a democratic state that is a stalwart ally of the West and between a brutal jihadi death cult that is the enemy of the West and the enemy of all humanity. And the road ahead is long, but I truly believe that with facts on our side, and enough faith, and enough conviction, and enough of an understanding about the stakes of this war, not only the war in Gaza, and Lebanon and the West Bank and Yemen and Syria and Iraq and Iran, because we're under attack on 8 different fronts, if you include the diaspora, but an understanding of the challenge that we, the Jewish people, face around the world. The challenge that we face not only to build a strong and secure homeland here in Israel, but to sustain a strong and sustainable diaspora around the world, with Jewish cousins around the world who will stand their ground and fight for their rightful place around the world. If we are able to leverage the incredible civilian mobilization in Israel when people dropped everything to come together and fight, and I personally benefited from the amazing team of volunteers who put their lives on hold to help me be a government spokesman. If we leverage that, if we leverage the diaspora awakening and the new connections that are being made now between Jews and the diaspora and their cousins here in Israel, and we understand the magnitude of the challenge facing us, then you know not to venture into Jewish conspiracy elders of Zion territory. But together we will be unbeatable. And we'll survive, and we'll thrive. And in Israel we say, Yeh beseder. It's not going to happen by itself, it's going to require a lot of work. But when I look out across the room now and see all of you who are so deeply committed to the Jewish people and to Israel and to your communities as well, I'm sure that it is a challenge that we will all rise to. Thank you very much, everyone. Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you. Main course, bon appetit.